He rolled his eyes the moment she spoke her name. That tiny gesture, a flicker of dismissive contempt crossing his polished face, set the tone for everything that followed. And in that crowded studio, beneath the glow of overhead lights that hummed and flickered like a silent jury, Jasmine Crockett felt the weight of every condescending stare she had ever encountered. She had marched into this place with unwavering resolve, carrying a small stack of documents that held more truth than the entire network's agenda ever would. But in that first moment, before she even offered a single fact, the anchor let the world see his cynicism. The slight upward roll of his eyes, the curving of his lips into a half-smile that said, "I've seen it all, and you don't matter here." His name was Marcus Fellows, a long-established authority figure in mainstream news circles, though perhaps only because he had perfected the art of looking serious while giving half-answers. His voice had guided the public through countless controversies, always towing the line of the network's biases. People at home recognized the confident angle of his chin, the deliberate monotone that slipped neatly between segments, the practiced neutrality that occasionally shattered in the face of stories he privately deemed too radical. On this particular day, something in the air felt more charged than usual. Maybe it was the breaking story about bureaucratic corruption that Jasmine was there to reveal. Or perhaps it was the subtle friction in the production staff's hurried movements. Wires tangling, earpieces crackling, interns racing around with last-minute facts about a scandal that the public had been thirsting to understand. But the tension was palpable. There was no warm introduction, no customary handshake or gracious nod. Marcus introduced Jasmine as though reading off a half-finished teleprompter, never meeting her eyes fully, never acknowledging the gravity of what she carried in her arms. She took her seat across from him, her posture stiff with a composed sense of defiance. She was not here to be well-liked. She had a mission to speak for those who had no voice, to dredge up truths that had long been drowned in bureaucratic paperwork and hush money. Yet, as her voice began, a steady, calm cadence that threatened to crack from the passion inside, she saw him roll his eyes, ever so slightly. One might have missed it if not watching carefully. But Jasmine had learned to watch, to read every micro-expression in the eyes of men who had tried to silence her. It was a skill she had honed in city council meetings, in dusty small-town courtrooms, and in the quiet corners of offices where she was told to wait indefinitely. She caught that gesture and took it like an arrow in her chest, letting the pain galvanize her. So she pressed on, leaning forward slightly, setting her documents on the table with a distinct sound that turned a few heads among the support staff. And the next words out of her mouth shifted the entire energy in the room. "I'm here to speak about something everyone else seems too frightened to touch," she said, voice trembling just enough to convey earnest emotion without losing composure. The dryness in her throat reminded her to take a breath, to steady herself, to channel the righteous determination that had brought her this far. The anchor folded his arms, letting a brief exhale hiss past his lips. That was him saying he was bored or unimpressed, a gesture he used like a weapon. The camera's red light burned a hole in the set's carefully orchestrated environment, capturing Jasmine's every move. But if the anchor thought she would wilt under the silent condemnation, he was sorely mistaken. "Go on," he said flatly. Then, as if reading from a script, he turned to face the nearest camera. "We have Ms. Jasmine Crockett with us today, who claims to have evidence of systemic misconduct in the awarding of public grants. Ms. Crockett," and here he shifted to look at her just enough to feign politeness, "the network is curious about what you believe you've uncovered." That was the invitation for her to speak, a courtesy, as though she needed permission to share facts that had the power to topple carefully constructed illusions. Jasmine steadied her breath once more, scanning the room. Producers behind the scenes held their iPads and laptops, eyes darting from her to Marcus, as if awaiting a signal to cut to commercial the minute things got out of hand. She had timed her reveal precisely so that they wouldn't dare cut away, for fear of public backlash. The entire region had been buzzing with rumors for weeks. The scandal had reached a boiling point, and if the network pulled away now, the outcry on social media would be relentless. So she used that to her advantage. "I don't just believe it," she began, her voice carrying the weight of months of research. "I know it, and I have more than enough proof to demonstrate the pattern of misconduct goes far deeper than any single official." She retrieved the top sheet of paper from her pile, a short excerpt from a public record. An expense ledger that had been manipulated. She slid it gently toward Marcus. A camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the tension in their locked gazes. He barely glanced at it. A flicker of disinterest. But she saw him swallow. And it was that small reaction that told her he knew this was serious. Yet his next move was an attempt to dismiss her. "We've seen a lot of so-called evidence in this news cycle," he said. "A lot of claims that end up being sensational rather than substantial. How do we know you aren't simply adding noise to an already complicated situation?" Beneath the table, Jasmine's hand clenched into a fist. That question, accusing her of hysteria or sensationalism, was the classic dismissal tactic. She had faced it so many times that she had begun anticipating it in her daily life, bracing herself for that exact phrase. "Thank you for asking," she responded, managing a calm but pointed tone. "First, let me clarify that these documents I hold are official city records, not hearsay. The ledger entries here were altered 2 weeks after the final signature was supposedly locked. That alone raises legal questions, because official records aren't meant to be retroactively changed. Second, but we don't know who changed them," Marcus cut in, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "How do we know this isn't just an administrative error, an oversight that you're blowing out of proportion?" She took a measured breath. "Because," she continued, refusing to let him derail her momentum, "the digital log shows the exact user account and timestamp for each alteration. It points back to a single individual's access, someone who had a vested interest in covering up misappropriation of funds. And that individual is on the public payroll. Furthermore, I've cross-referenced deposit records that show a series of money transfers from third parties into this individual's personal account, timed perfectly with these edits." She slipped another paper forward. A hush fell over the control room. Even the anchor's posture shifted, his arms lowering slightly as he recognized the gravity of what she was detailing. Her voice grew firmer with each piece of evidence presented, painting a picture of systematic manipulation that funneled taxpayer money into the pockets of allies, donors, and hidden agendas. Outside the thick studio doors, the station's hallway was silent, as though everyone had paused to listen through the cracks and wait for the next bombshell. One of the producers waved frantically at Marcus, trying to capture his attention from behind a glass partition. Possibly they wanted to cut to commercial. Possibly they wanted him to steer the conversation onto safer ground. But Jasmine wasn't finished, and by now the tension in the anchor's eyes betrayed that he realized he was no longer in full control. "You're suggesting," he said, measuring each word, "that there's a conspiracy here, orchestrated by public officials, to hide embezzlement of state resources." "I'm not suggesting," she replied, with a calm that belied the storm inside her. "I'm stating it outright, and I'm naming names." She read off a list, each name belonging to a figure well known in local politics. Some had built entire careers on the promise of transparency and fairness. Others had quietly ascended the ranks by navigating behind-the-scenes power plays. Each name fell like a hammer blow onto the polished studio floor, resonating with the ring of an unyielding bell that refused to be ignored. The anchor's mouth twitched, an involuntary reaction. He forced a tight smile to keep the broadcast aura of neutrality, but the corners of his eyes revealed alarm. The station's phones began lighting up in the background as viewers, outraged or shocked, started calling. The anchor's earpiece crackled with frantic instructions. Still, the red light on the camera remained lit, meaning they were live, and it was far too risky to cut away now. Social media was ablaze with the story. One producer stepped back in horror at the realization that they might be hosting the single biggest whistleblower testimony of the year, all while the network's standard playbook was to manage narratives, not expose them. The anchor's gaze flicked toward the camera, then back to Jasmine. She felt in that moment the weight of every viewer's attention on her shoulders, and for just a second, her composure wavered. She remembered the intimidation she had faced in quiet corners, the legal threats, the friendly advice to drop her investigation if she valued her future. She recalled how often entire institutions found ways to bury the truth under miles of bureaucratic red tape. But here she was, broadcasting it for all to see, unable to be dismissed as rumor or conspiracy theory. Marcus cleared his throat. "That's quite an accusation," he said. "You must realize how serious this is." "I do," she answered softly, letting her conviction radiate. "Which is why I've spent months verifying every detail, chasing every lead, and safeguarding duplicates of these records in multiple locations. If anyone tries to spin this as a misunderstanding, I have enough backups to show the truth 100 times over. Beneath her unwavering gaze, the anchor seemed to shift his strategy. His job was to control the narrative, so he took a different angle, leaning forward as though in confidence. "If this is all true," he said, voice dripping with forced concern, "why bring it here to a news program known for, let's be honest, maintaining certain boundaries with government institutions? Why not go straight to law enforcement? Or at the very least partner with a grassroots organization that might champion your cause more openly?" He was trying to frame her as an attention seeker, discrediting her by implying she was chasing the spotlight. Jasmine steadied her gaze. "Because," she said, "for too long, information has been funneled through gatekeepers who decide what the public can and cannot see. I approached local law enforcement and my calls went unanswered. I reached out to national watchdog organizations, and I was told to stand in line behind hundreds of other urgent cases. Meanwhile, the individuals perpetuating this scheme continued to move freely, awarding new contracts, reshaping entire communities without accountability. This story demands immediate attention, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a story as big as this won't be silenced once the public catches wind. So I came here, to your studio, live on air, because I knew the ratings would be high and the attempt to bury it would be that much harder. You're all about capturing eyes, aren't you? Well, now you have them, along with an undeniable exposé." The phones behind the set continued to ring. The anchor inhaled deeply, perhaps recalling the dismissive eye roll he had offered her at the start. A flash of something close to regret crossed his features, but he was too proud to fully back down. "We need to confirm your claims," he said, forcing a measured tone. "Our viewers deserve factual integrity." "I agree," she responded, "which is why I didn't come here empty-handed." She tapped the stack of papers. "I've brought everything, and anyone who wants to fact-check it can. This is bigger than you or me, bigger than this station, bigger than any single official trying to pad their pockets. It's a breach of trust at the highest levels, and it's going to take more than a single interview to fix it. But I will not rest until that happens." A suffocating silence followed. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed to dim under the gravity of her words. The anchor finally let his facade slip just enough to reveal a crack in his confidence. "We have to take a brief pause," he said, his voice faltering as if reading instructions in his earpiece. "But when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Ms. Crockett, who has laid out serious allegations about public officials. Stay with us." The red light blinked off. Immediately, chaos erupted behind the scenes. Producers rushed forward trying to get hold of the documents, perhaps to snatch them away or at least glance through them. An intern muttered into a phone giving updates to an unknown party. The anchor pivoted in his chair to face Jasmine more directly. His carefully contrived on-air neutrality gave way to a bristling frustration. "What's your angle?" he said under his breath, checking over his shoulder to ensure the microphones were muted. She met his gaze with unwavering calm. "Truth," she replied. "Something you seem uncomfortable with." He scoffed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, dislodging it just enough to show he was rattled. "Look," he said quietly, "there are lines even we can't cross. Networks have sponsors, relationships, obligations." She cut him off with a sharp whisper. "And the public has a right to know." The anchor frowned, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know how these institutions work," he said. "Even if you're right, do you realize the blowback? There are people who will ruin your life, your family's life." Jasmine's heart pounded. She had been warned, threatened, coerced, but something in her refused to bend. "I've heard it all before," she said, "and yet here I am, still speaking." He shook his head in exasperation. "You're reckless," he muttered. "You're going to set off a firestorm and then walk away as if it's not your problem." "It is my problem," she said, voice quivering with the strain of keeping her emotions in check. "It's everyone's problem. That's precisely why I can't walk away." The floor manager gestured at them. "Back in 20 seconds, he called, voice tense. The anchor turned away, focusing on the teleprompter, which scrolled automatically in preparation for the next segment. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, pulling in a slow breath. This was it. The moment she had envisioned for so long, a platform to speak truth in front of countless observers. forcibly tearing through the dense wall of misinformation. She recalled the nights she spent poring over records, her eyes aching from the screen's glow, the frustration of being stonewalled at every step. She remembered her grandmother's words about how justice is not something we request politely, but something we seize with courage when all else fails. The camera's light went live again. The anchor straightened, adjusting his tie. "We're back," he announced, expertly slipping into his professional tone as if the heated exchange off-air had never happened. "We have Ms. Jasmine Crockett here, who has made some very serious allegations of systemic corruption." He paused, forcing a tight smile. "Ms. Crockett, the question on everyone's mind. Do you have absolute confidence in your claims?" She met his stare, letting a silent moment pass. Her chest rose with a steady inhale. Then she replied, "Yes, absolute confidence. And I'm prepared to stand by every word in any court against any lawyer. I only ask that the public keep its eyes open and refuse to be distracted by the smokescreens certain powerful figures will inevitably deploy." There was a flicker in the anchor's eyes again, but this time it wasn't just condescension. It was something akin to apprehension, a subtle recognition that perhaps the story was too big, even for him to control. "For our viewers," he said, turning to the camera, "we understand these are weighty claims. We'll be bringing in additional experts to analyze Ms. Crockett's documents. As a network, we do not endorse or reject her claims until a thorough investigation is conducted. But we do thank you, Ms. Crockett, for sharing your perspective." She caught the coded language. Perspective, allegations, words that softened the truth into a matter of opinion. But she also heard the uncertain undertone in his voice. He was already trying to contain the damage, to distance the network from the storm. "I hope," she responded softly, "that the network will do the right thing. The people deserve transparency." As the broadcast moved to a mundane weather update, the kind of abrupt shift meant to temper the tension, Jasmine felt her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. This was only the first volley in a conflict that promised to ripple far beyond these studio walls. She had expected pushback, but something about the anchor's reaction signaled a deeper entanglement than she had previously suspected. She could sense the wheels turning behind that forced professionalism, suspecting he might already be making calls, orchestrating damage control, or even planning to discredit her once the cameras were off. The next hours were a blur. She was whisked into a side room by a junior producer who offered her water and asked if she had more documents. Jasmine sensed the producer's anxiety, saw how her hands trembled when she took notes. "They might cut the segment from the replays," the producer warned in a hushed tone. "You should know that. This might never air on prime time again." Jasmine offered a resolute nod. "I've recorded everything," she said, tapping her own phone discreetly. "The truth is out now, at least for those who were watching live. And the rest, well, I have ways to make sure this conversation doesn't vanish." The producer bit her lip, glancing at the door. "Be careful," she whispered. "People like them. They don't like losing control." Moments later, as Jasmine stepped into the hallway to leave, she caught sight of the anchor standing near a corner, whispering furiously into his phone. His body language radiated anger. She caught the words, "Yes, I know, but that's on them, not me. I can't muzzle her on live television." And then his voice trailed off as he noticed her approach. He ended the call abruptly. "Good luck," he said, with a sarcastic tilt of his head. Then he turned away. She walked out into the midday sun, documents clutched against her chest, uncertain what the next move by these powerful interests might be. But she felt the steady drumbeat of courage in her heart. She had spoken the words, and they could not be unsaid. Word traveled fast. By evening, social media was exploding with clips from the broadcast, recorded off phones and posted online. Hashtags trended, local officials scrambled for statements, and journalists from smaller outlets rushed to contact Jasmine for follow-up interviews. The station itself remained suspiciously quiet, cycling through banal stories about local weather patterns and trivial celebrity gossip, offering no mention of the explosive revelations that had dominated the morning show. And in that disquieting silence, the public's curiosity only grew. Late that night, Jasmine found herself in a small apartment that served as both her home and her makeshift office. The air conditioner rattled as it fought the balmy summer heat. On her laptop screen, notifications piled up by the second, interview requests, supportive messages, accusations, threats. She read each one with meticulous care, aware that every reaction painted a portrait of a society wrestling with its conscience. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, a lonely sound echoing through the dimly lit streets. She pushed aside her exhaustion, focusing on the next step. She had planned for this moment. Part of her had anticipated the anchor's dismissive reactions, the station's attempts to bury her story after the fact. She had allies, a few honest reporters from smaller publications who believed in her cause, a handful of grassroots organizations eager for tangible proof of corruption, and a silent majority of regular citizens who sensed the rotting stench of institutional decay, but had never seen it spelled out so clearly. The next morning arrived with a harsh light that broke through the blinds, stirring her from uneasy rest. She checked her phone to find half a dozen missed calls, some from local news affiliates, some from unknown numbers that she suspected might be connected to the very institutions she was challenging. She swallowed her anxiety, remembering that each day forward would be a battle. She was prepared to fight it. Then came a knock at her door. She froze for a moment, cautious. Nobody had called to say they'd be coming by. She stood quietly, watching the doorknob. Another knock. She approached, checking through the peephole. A middle-aged man in a neatly pressed suit stood outside, holding a business card. Carefully, she opened the door an inch, chain still on. "Yes?" she said, voice tense. "Ms. Crockett?" His tone was calm, almost too pleasant. "I'm an investigator with the state attorney's office. I'd like to speak with you about the documents you presented on the broadcast." Her heart raced. She had emailed them in the past with no response, so this unannounced visit made her wary. "Do you have ID?" He slipped his card through the gap. It had an official seal and a name she vaguely recognized. Someone who had been quietly building a case, if the rumors were true. She unlatched the chain. "Come in," she said, stepping back. The man entered, casting a glance around the modest living space as if assessing her environment. He offered a polite nod. "I saw your segment," he began. "Well, I saw the unedited clips that have been floating around online. Fascinating allegations. And if true, they confirm certain suspicions we've had for quite some time." Jasmine felt a mix of relief and skepticism. "Then why didn't you return my calls before?" He sighed. "Politics. Office priorities. Timing. None of it is a good excuse, I'll admit. But this scandal might be bigger than we ever anticipated. I wanted to speak face to face to ensure we handle this the right way." She motioned for him to sit at the small table near the window. The stack of documents lay in plain view, an intimidating tower of official forms, receipts, and annotated notes. The investigator leaned in. "Can you walk me through the timeline?" She began to explain how she'd stumbled on inconsistencies in grant allocations, how that breadcrumb trail led her deeper into suspect records, how every inquiry was met with evasive answers until she pieced together the puzzle. The man listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a leather notebook. Despite her initial apprehension, she sensed genuine interest. "We need you to sign a statement," he said eventually. "And if you're willing, we'd like you to hand over these originals for our team to examine." She hesitated. "I've seen evidence get lost before." He inclined his head in understanding. "That won't happen this time. I'm prepared to give you a receipt of custody and an official log number, but I can't pretend there's no risk. Cases this big tend to have a lot of moving parts." She closed her eyes, recalling the anchor's dismissive expression. She pictured the officials whose names she had read on air, people with power, resources, and a willingness to destroy any threat to their status. But she also felt the intangible force of public support swirling around her, a wave of outrage that refused to subside. Nodding, she said, "All right, let's do it. I just want justice." He placed a reassuring hand near her arm but did not touch her, as if recognizing the delicate trust being exchanged. "So do I," he said quietly. "Believe me." By late afternoon, the investigator was gone, carrying a sealed box of documents. She sat alone, the emptiness of the apartment pressing in, wondering if she had just handed over her lifeline, or if she had taken a crucial step toward dismantling the corruption. In the following days, the backlash arrived in waves. Anonymous emails threatened her safety. Online trolls labeled her a liar, a partisan actor with an axe to grind. Certain influential figures publicly questioned her motives, painting her as a fame seeker, The local press, initially intrigued, began to hedge their bets, offering lukewarm coverage that regurgitated official statements denying wrongdoing. But the anchor, Marcus Fellows, remained conspicuously silent about the interview, never revisiting it on air, avoiding the topic as if it were radioactive. Then came the day Jasmine received a subpoena. She opened the official envelope with trembling hands, expecting it to be a summons for a deposition as part of the state attorney's emerging case. Instead, she found something else. A lawsuit filed against her by one of the individuals she had accused on air, citing defamation, demanding damages for reputational harm. Her breath caught. It was a move she had braced for, but it still sent ice through her veins. She called the investigator, but he was tight-lipped, advising her that while the defamation suit might be a strategic maneuver to intimidate her, the formal process of the corruption investigation was still ongoing. She hung up and sank onto the couch, her mind churning. She thought of all the allies who had pledged support, but she also knew legal battles could be endless, expensive, draining. That night, she paced the floor, reflecting on her entire journey. Memories flooded back, the whispers in quiet hallways, the risk she took stepping into the public eye, and that dismissive eye roll from Marcus Fellows that ignited a fire in her soul. She recognized that in challenging deeply embedded structures, there was no easy path. The next morning, she appeared at the courthouse for the defamation hearing, a preliminary step to address the suit's validity. The corridor was lined with journalists, some local, some from regional outlets who had picked up on the story's growing momentum. Cameras flashed. Voices called out questions. She kept her head high, ignoring the swirl of half-truths that accompanied the coverage. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick. Rows of silent observers filled the benches. She caught sight of a few supporters, friends who had come to stand by her. At the front, the opposing counsel, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers, exuded a smug confidence. This was a power play. Bury the whistleblower in legal entanglements, make her second-guess her convictions. She took a seat, exhaling slowly, and then something unexpected happened. The side door opened and in walked Marcus Fellows, his tailored suit inconspicuous enough that only a handful of people recognized him at first. He scanned the room, deliberately avoiding her gaze, and took a seat among the spectators. Whispers erupted. What was he doing here? Was he covering this for the network? Or was he simply curious about how the spectacle would unfold? Jasmine's chest tightened. The judge entered, calling the hearing to order. Lawyers for the plaintiff launched into a lengthy tirade about how Ms. Crockett had maliciously defamed an upstanding official, how her allegations lacked merit, how she was part of a smear campaign. Jasmine bristled at the distortions. When her turn came, her appointed counsel rose, calmly pointing out that evidence was already under official investigation, that the suit was a blatant attempt to silence legitimate claims, that in a free society, shining a light on suspicious activity was not defamation, but a civic duty. The argument raged back and forth until the judge, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes, intervened, requesting clarity on the status of the criminal investigation. She was informed that the state attorney's office had indeed opened a formal inquiry based on Ms. Crockett's disclosures. A hush fell as the judge considered. She eventually ruled that the defamation case was premature. The allegations in question were under formal scrutiny, and Ms. Crockett's right to free speech in matters of public concern had strong legal precedents backing it. Though the lawsuit wasn't dismissed outright, the judge put a stay on further proceedings until the criminal investigation concluded. It was a partial victory. Jasmine breathed a sigh of relief. The plaintiff's counsel looked furious. As people filed out, cameras swarmed. And there, in the corner, stood Marcus Fellows, his expression unreadable. She found herself walking toward him, uncertain what to say. He spoke first, voice low to avoid the microphones that hovered nearby. "You might have just poked the hornet's nest even harder," he murmured. "They're going to come at you from every angle now." She studied him, trying to gauge if there was concern or condescension in his words. "I don't have any regrets," she said softly. He nodded, a complicated flicker in his gaze. "I never thought I'd say this," he admitted, "but I respect your determination. A lot of people in that newsroom, they pretend to care about truth. You actually care. It might just get you crushed." Her heart twisted at the unexpected hint of empathy. "Then why not help me?" she asked. her voice trembling with the weight of the question. If you believe in what I'm doing, you have a platform that can shape public perception. You could do more than stand on the sidelines. He glanced away. It's not that simple, he said, tension creeping into his voice. My network has ties, obligations. I have a contract. They watch what I say. They watch everything. You can't hide behind them forever, she replied. Eventually, you'll have to decide who you are. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He started to speak, then paused, as if the words were too costly. He began, but the press surged in, separating them. Microphones were thrust at Jasmine, voices clamoring for a statement. Marcus turned, slipping away in the crowd. Days turned to weeks. The official investigation pressed forward in near silence, offering no public updates. Yet every day, more pieces of evidence leaked. Some came from anonymous sources, others from allied activists who had grown tired of the charade. Jasmine became a reluctant figurehead for a movement that demanded accountability. Her face splashed across social media with rallying cries to stand with the truth. Meanwhile, the pushback intensified. She was followed by unmarked cars. Her phone calls mysteriously dropped, and rumors circulated that she was on some watch list. Late one evening, a rock was thrown through her apartment window, the glass shattering in a burst of violent sound. She rushed to call the police, but the responding officer seemed more interested in her personal involvement in the corruption case than in investigating the vandalism. Frustration gnawed at her. "Are you taking this seriously?" she demanded, gesturing to the shards of glass littering her floor. The officer just shrugged, scribbling notes on a pad. "Could be kids, random troublemakers. Unless you have proof it's tied to your whistleblowing, there's not much I can do." She watched him go, feeling helpless. But that same night she received a text from an unknown number. "Don't give up. People are behind you." It was a small spark of hope in the darkness. A week later, the station abruptly announced that Marcus Fellows would be conducting a special segment on the recent allegations of government misconduct. The promotion ran on a loop, fueling intense speculation. Would he finally give Jasmine's story the spotlight it deserved? Or was this another attempt to sanitize the narrative? Jasmine found herself glued to the broadcast when the night arrived. She watched alone, her nerves frayed. The segment opened with Marcus in the anchor's chair, looking unusually grave. His usual polished demeanor was tinged with something else, an undercurrent of tension that crackled in the air. He began, "In recent weeks, we've all heard claims about misuse of public funds and official misconduct. Tonight, we examine the evidence. But first, I'd like to address the storm of commentary that has surrounded our coverage." He paused, inhaling, as if making a conscious decision. "When Ms. Jasmine Crockett came on this show, I dismissed her too quickly," he continued, surprising even himself with the admission. "I rolled my eyes, on camera, and my skepticism was plain to see. Since then, I've been reflecting on the role of journalists, the public's right to know, and the danger of complacency in the face of serious accusations." Jasmine stared at the screen, her heart pounding. This was unexpected. He went on, his voice tinged with genuine regret. "It's not easy to challenge powerful institutions, but it's also not easy to stand by and watch as someone tries to expose potential corruption while you remain silent. The truth is, we, as a network, often exist within an echo chamber of caution. We worry about sponsors, about retaliation, about stepping beyond the boundaries we've grown accustomed to. But if we don't push those boundaries, who will?" The camera angle tightened on his face, capturing the intensity in his eyes. "Tonight," he said, "I want to lay out the facts that have emerged and let the public decide. We have documents that appear to show altered ledgers, suspicious financial transactions, and an ongoing investigation by the state attorney's office. As of this moment, no one has been charged, but the allegations are credible enough to warrant public scrutiny." He pressed a button on his desk, and the screen behind him displayed digital replicas of some of the documents Jasmine had provided. He pointed out the inconsistencies, naming officials who now faced questions about their roles. He refrained from sensationalizing, instead methodically presenting the data. Then, in a stunning moment, he looked directly into the camera. "Ms. Crockett, if you're watching, I owe you an apology. I should have listened more carefully when you first brought this forward. It's a journalist's duty to question and to verify. But it's also our duty to remain open to the possibility that the truth is bigger than our own preconceptions. I let you down, and I let our viewers down, by allowing skepticism to overshadow the facts. This broadcast is my attempt to set that right. Jasmine's throat tightened. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved, astonished, or wary, yet she felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Tears of validation, of acknowledgement. In that moment, the anchor's admission felt like a seismic shift in a story that had seemed so stacked against her. He proceeded with caution, but he laid out enough for viewers to sense the gravity of the situation. The broadcast ended with him urging the public to follow official updates and to keep demanding transparency. "Thank you for watching," he concluded, "and for holding us accountable." The logo of the news station filled the screen, and the segment transitioned to another story. Jasmine exhaled, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. She had never expected such a turnaround from Marcus. The very next day, the station's phone lines and social media feeds were bombarded with reactions, both supportive and critical. Some accused Marcus of capitulating to mob pressure, while others praised him for doing the right thing. Regardless, the conversation had been ignited once more, and this time it was fueled by a rare admission from an anchor who was emblematic of mainstream media's caution. Encouraged, Jasmine picked up her phone, scanning through messages. She found one from an old friend in a community organization, inviting her to speak at a public forum. Another from a local politician, praising her courage, yet also cautioning her about the uphill battle ahead. And then one from an unknown number. "We see you, and we won't forget." She didn't know if it was a threat or a message of solidarity. Days passed, and with each new cycle of revelations, the scandal broadened. More officials were implicated. Documents poured in from whistleblowers, emboldened by Jasmine's example. The state attorney's office made public statements about the breadth of the investigation, acknowledging credible leads. As the net tightened around the corrupt network, the backlash against Jasmine escalated too. Online harassment soared. Murmurings about her personal life were circulated to discredit her. People rummaged through her past, trying to find any morsel of scandal to paint her as unreliable. She stood firm, even as acquaintances pulled away, fearing association with her might bring consequences. And through it all, that fleeting moment when Marcus Fellows had publicly admitted fault remained etched in her mind. It was a sign that even the most entrenched players in this game might not be entirely lost to cynicism. Weeks turned into months, and finally, official charges were filed against 3 high-ranking officials named in Jasmine's initial documents. The press conference announcing the indictments was packed, every major outlet present. The anchor, who once rolled his eyes at her, now reported on the legal developments with a sober, steady tone, occasionally glancing at the camera with an undercurrent of conviction that hadn't been there before. Public opinion had shifted, turning Jasmine from a fringe whistleblower into a symbol of citizen-driven accountability. She was invited to speak at community gatherings, university lectures, and even a televised town hall. Yet, she never forgot the chilling attempts to silence her, the nights when fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve, the time she saw her own reflection in a shattered window, questioning if she was truly strong enough. But each time, she pressed on, believing in the cause that guided her. The final legal proceedings proved a dramatic spectacle, culminating in the convictions of officials who had abused their positions to siphon funds. The evidence Jasmine gathered, corroborated by newly surfaced records, left little room for doubt. A wave of relief and renewed faith in due process swept through the community, though scars remained. The relentless attempts to bury her story had revealed just how fragile accountability could be. In the aftermath, Marcus requested an interview with Jasmine. This time, a genuine conversation meant to reflect on the entire ordeal. At first, she was hesitant. She remembered his arrogance, his refusal to give her story a fair shake until it became impossible to ignore. But she also recalled his public effort to correct himself, and in a world where so few ever owned their mistakes, that counted for something. So she agreed. The day of the interview, she returned to the same studio, the same bright lights overhead. Marcus met her outside the set, his stance less guarded than before. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. She gave a small nod. "I'm here to talk about what happened," she replied. Not to be a spectacle, he led her to the chairs where they would speak. Live broadcast. This time the tension felt different, no less charged, but laced with a thread of mutual respect. Jasmine, he began, looking directly at her, can you describe how it feels to see justice served after all you went through? She took a moment, collecting her thoughts. It feels complicated. I'm relieved that the corruption is being addressed, but I'm also very aware that for every injustice we bring to light, there may be many more lurking in the shadows. This isn't the end, just one victory. The anchor nodded solemnly. People have called you courageous, a hero even. How do you respond to that? She folded her hands, remembering the nights of isolation and fear. I never set out to be a hero. I just couldn't keep quiet. I think anyone who sees wrongdoing and has the means to expose it has a moral responsibility to do so. Courage, in my mind, is just the act of not letting fear silence you. Marcus glanced at his notes but then set them aside, deciding to speak candidly. I was skeptical of you. I underestimated you. And I realize now that it was easier to dismiss you than to accept how messy and real your claims might be. For that, I sincerely apologize. Jasmine felt a swirl of emotions. Apology accepted, she said quietly. I hope it serves as a reminder that we can't judge the importance of someone's message based on how convenient it is for us. He inclined his head. Indeed. So, what's next for you? She exhaled, her gaze drifting momentarily. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll focus on helping others who have evidence but are too afraid to speak. Maybe I'll write about this experience in hopes that people realize we all have a role in holding power to account. But first, I need to catch my breath. This fight took a toll. The interview concluded on a note of reflection rather than triumphant fanfare. The camera panned out, capturing two individuals, once adversaries, now meeting on a common ground of understanding. The feed ended. In the days that followed, Jasmine found some semblance of peace. The defamation suit against her was dismissed, the plaintiffs having no grounds to continue once the corruption charges were proven. The anchor's public acknowledgement had, in some small way, shifted the culture within the news station, prompting fresher, bolder coverage of controversial stories. And the community, awakened from apathy, began to scrutinize local politics more vigorously. One evening, as she sat alone in a small cafe near the courthouse, savoring a moment of quiet anonymity, a young woman approached her. Thank you, the woman said softly. For what? Jasmine asked, looking up from her tea. The woman swallowed. For not backing down when they tried to make you. My family and we felt powerless for so long. It means something to see someone stand up and make a difference. Jasmine felt a warmth bloom in her chest. She reached out, giving the woman's hand a gentle squeeze. We all have more power than we realize, she said. Sometimes it just takes someone to light the spark. Later that night, Jasmine walked through streets that felt both familiar and strange. She was no longer just that determined individual chasing a lead. She was a figure recognized for changing the conversation. It was a weighty responsibility, but she carried it with humility. At home, she flipped through the channels, stumbling on a replay of her final interview. She watched her own face, the set behind her. She watched Marcus, whose eyes no longer brimmed with the dismissive scorn that had once defined him. There was something affirming about it, a testament to the possibility that even those entrenched in the system could be reached by truth. She powered down the TV, a weary smile on her lips. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends checking in, activists asking for advice. She'd respond tomorrow. Tonight she needed rest. As she curled into bed, a single thought resonated in the quiet of her mind. Truth can be silenced temporarily, mocked, doubted. But once it's out there, once someone dares to speak it plainly in front of everyone, it cannot be rolled away or ridiculed out of existence. It will, in time, unleash consequences that no amount of institutional denial can contain. Outside her window, the city was alive with distant sounds, cars moving, people talking, life going on. She closed her eyes, feeling not triumph, but a deep sense of responsibility and hope. Let them roll their eyes, she thought. Let them doubt. Let them dismiss. She had unleashed the truth once, and she would do it again if she had to. Because in the end, that unwavering commitment to what's right is the most powerful force of all.